Good day, students, distinguished guests, and esteemed scholars. Today we gather here to delve into the profound and tumultuous chapter of history that is forever etched into the annals of human civilization, the American War in Vietnam. This war, spanning over 2 decades, carried profound consequences not only for the nations involved, but also for the global community as a whole. To understand the complexities of the American War in Vietnam, we must delve into its origins. Following World War II, Vietnam sought independence from the French colonizers, resulting in the First Indochina War. This conflict culminated in the Geneva Accords of 1954, which temporarily divided Vietnam into 2 separate entities: the Communist-led Democratic Republic of Vietnam and the Anti-Communist Republic of Vietnam. As the Cold War gained momentum, the United States became increasingly concerned about the spread of communism. Fearing a domino effect where one country fall into the communism would lead to the collapse of its neighbors, the United States adopted a policy of containment. This policy shaped its involvement in Vietnam as it perceived the conflict as a battleground in the larger struggle against communism. In the early 1960s, in the United States escalated its military involvement in Vietnam. American military advisors were sent to support the South Vietnamese government, but the situation rapidly evolved. Following an alleged attack on U.S. ships in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to use military force in Vietnam. This marked a significant turning point as the U.S. involvement escalated into a full-fledged war. The American War in Vietnam was marked by an array of strategic and tactical challenges. The terrain and climate of Vietnam posed a unique obstacle for the U.S. military, which was accustomed to more conventional warfare. The dense jungles, intricate network of tunnels, and guerrilla tactics employed by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army made it difficult conflict to persecute. One of the defining aspects of the American War in Vietnam was the pervasive anti-war sentiment that emerged domestically. The war sparked a wave of protests, social unrest, and a deep divide among the American public. People questioned the justification for U.S. involvement, the morality of the conflict, and the toll it was taking on the American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians alike. The Tet Offensive in 1968 stands as the watershed moment in the war. It was a coordinated attack by Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces on several key targets throughout South Vietnam, including the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Although the offensive resulted in heavy casualties for the Viet Cong, it shocked the American public and further eroded support for the war. As the conflict dragged on, it became increasingly clear the victory of the United States was elusive. The mounting casualties and economic strain forced a reassessment of the U.S. strategy. The anti-war movement intensified, leading to protests and demonstrations across the nation. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, effectively ending direct U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The legacy of the American War in Vietnam is complex and multifaceted. The war claimed the lives of millions of Vietnamese civilians and soldiers, as well as over 58,000 American servicemen. It left deep scars on both nations, with families torn apart, landscapes devastated, and communities shattered. But war also profoundly influenced American foreign policy and the nation's self-image. It led to a period of introspection and reassessment of military interventionism. The lessons learned from Vietnam shaped subsequent military engagements and the way the United States approached the conflicts around the world. In conclusion, the American War in Vietnam remains a poignant reminder of the complexities and consequences of armed conflicts, and highlights the importance of understanding historical context, the power of public sentiment, and the significance of moral and ethical considerations. Alright, here are 20 facts about the American War in Vietnam. Number 1. The war officially began in the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution on August 7, 1964. The United States had over 500,000 troops stationed in Vietnam at the peak in the war in 1969. The Tet Offensive, launched by Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, occurred on January 30, 1968. The My Lai massacre took place on March 16, 1968, resulting in the killing of hundreds of Vietnamese civilians by U.S. troops. Number 5. The anti-war movement in the United States gained significant momentum in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Number 6. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27, 1973, officially ending direct U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Number 7. Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign by the U.S. against North Vietnam, began on March 2, 1965. Number 8, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of supply routes used by North Vietnamese, was established in the late 1950s. Number 9, Battle of Hamburger Hill, also known as Hill 937 Battle, took place from May 10th to May 20th, 1969. Number 10, the U.S. military extensively used the herbicide Agent Orange to defoliate the jungles, causing long-lasting environmental and health consequences. 11. The Kent State shooting occurred on May 4, 1970, when National Guard troops killed 4 student protesters during a demonstration against the war. Number 12. The Pentagon Papers, leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, were published by the New York Times on June 13, 1971, revealing the U.S. government's secret history and decision-making process related to the war. Number 13. Fall of Saigon took place on April 30, 1975, marking the end of the war and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. Number 14. The military draft, a source of controversy and protest, was in effect from 1948 to 1973. Number 15. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. was dedicated on November 13, 1982, as a tribute to the fallen soldiers of the war. Number 16. Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon, was renamed on April 30th, 1975, in honor of the North Vietnamese leader. Number 17. The War Powers Act was passed by U.S. Congress on November 7, 1973, in response to the perceived abuse of presidential power during the Vietnam War. Number 18. The U.S. bombing campaign extended into neighboring countries, including Laos and Cambodia, as part of the efforts to disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines. Number 19. The Paris Peace Accords established a ceasefire and called for the release of prisoners of war. The fighting continued sporadically until the fall of Saigon. Number 20. The lasting effects of the war included displacement of millions of people, the rise of PTSD awareness, and the re-evaluation of U.S. foreign policy. All right. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.